All right. Thank you all for joining us for MPG's monthly webinar series meant for parents and professionals. Today we have Mohini Bhargava here to present on how to help your teen who self-harms. And we will get a little bit more into her background, but first I'm going to tell you a little bit about MPG. Mohini, can you go to the next slide, please? Awesome. MPG is a multidisciplinary team that was established in 2011 by Dr. Joshua Rosenthal. We are consisted of 200 plus adult and child psychologists, neuropsychologists, board certified behavior analysts, and special educators. We provide services virtually and in person at our Upper West Side office, as well as in-home services for behavior analytics services throughout the greater New York City metro, including the 5 boroughs, Northern New Jersey, Long Island, and Westchester. We serve clients of all ages, most conditions and challenges, and work in all settings. We provide a wraparound care model, including psychological testing, ABA, behavioral, and educational services. Our psych services, as you can see listed here, are wide-ranging, including CBT, PCIT, SPACE, social skills group, neuropsych testing, ABA, and much more. We offer payment options of private pay, commercial health insurance, and DOE impartial hearing order options. We go to the next. Perfect. And our vision is to create a future where individuals and their families feel supported, connected, and empowered. Our mission is to provide multidisciplinary integrated support for individuals and their families who experience mental health, behavioral, and educational challenges. All right, and today's presenter is Mohini Bhargava, and I'm going to tell you just a little bit about Mohini. She is a licensed social worker who obtained her BA in psychology from the University of Michigan, her master's in clinical psychology from Columbia University in New York, and her MSW from Washington University in St. Louis. She specializes in working with young children and their families and is formally trained in parent-child interaction therapy. In addition to being formally trained in PCIT, Mohini has extensive training from the Beck Institute in Cognitive Behavioral Therapy for depression and anxiety. She is also trained in dialectical behavior therapy, parent management training, and trauma-focused CBT. Additionally, she has experience implementing exposure response prevention for the treatment of obsessive compulsive disorder. Mohini has expertise in the assessment and treatment of children and adolescents. She has numerous years of experience in the evaluation and treatment of depression, anxiety, trauma, and obsessive compulsive behavior. Mohini has worked across clinical settings, including psychiatric hospitals, private practices, and outpatient clinics. We are so grateful that she's here to talk today on this topic, and we appreciate any questions you have regarding. Please make sure that you're using the Q&A so we can get to them at the end of the presentation.
All right, thank you so much, Lakin. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Today, I'm going to be speaking to you about how to help your teen who engages in self-harm behavior, how to understand that better, and how to give them the support that they need. So I'm going to start with just defining what self-harm is, just so you can understand a little bit of like how this is manifested and what this looks like. So self-harm occurs when teens try to hurt themselves on purpose to reduce or communicate psychological distress. Oftentimes people think that self-harm occurs because people are trying to seek attention or they're going through a phase. So through this presentation, I want to emphasize that self-harm, people engage in self-harm in order to communicate psychological distress or when they're experiencing overwhelming emotions. Research has shown that when an individual harms his or her body, the brain may release naturally occurring opiate-like chemicals like endorphins that are experienced as pleasurable and as a relief, provide a relief from emotional distress. There are different ways in which self-harm occurs. I've listed some of the different ways over here on the slide. Cutting, scratching, or carving is the most, research has shown that it's the most frequent ways in which teenagers self-harm. This is what I've seen most of as well in a clinical setting. This is generally done with a sharp instrument, so it could be scissors, razor, a knife, self-burning that could be done with cigarettes, excoriation of wounds, which is just picking at wounds, hitting their heads, which could be against a wall, self-hitting or self-inflicted tattoos. The next thing I want to go into is just understanding the difference between what is self-harm versus what's a suicide attempt, because many times when a teenager engages in self-harm behavior, um, it sometimes people might think that it's a suicide attempt, and this ends up resulting in unnecessary hospitalization, and the treatment is also different. So it's very important to understand, was this self-harm or was this attempted suicide? The first thing that you want to do is find out the intent, like why was a person engaging in that behavior in the first place? Because a majority of people who self-harm say that they want to relieve themselves of painful feelings. It's just a temporary solution that they utilize because they lack the coping skills to be able to use a different strategy in order to feel better in that moment. But the goal is always to get through that painful feeling, that painful moment, in order to live another day. With people who are attempting suicide, it's not a temporary solution. This is how they want to end their lives. With self-harm, most of the time, even though when someone engages in self-harm behavior, it's a way to relieve themselves of painful feelings, but they do feel a sense of relief after engaging in that behavior. You'll notice when it's a suicide attempt and it's unsuccessful, you'll notice people feel disappointed after that. So another thing that's important to understand is the type of relief that the person is experiencing following that incident of self-harm, because this can help from a treatment perspective as well, to help them with those coping skills that they lack. So for instance, if someone is self-harming only when they're experiencing strong feelings of anxiety, maybe the treatment would involve teaching them mindfulness strategies or other relaxation strategies to substitute that with more healthier coping strategies. If someone is self-harming because at times when they feel really angry, maybe the solution is part of the treatment would involve teaching them some anger management strategies. So it's really important to understand the type of relief that they're experiencing when they do engage in self-harm. Something that a lot of people think is that when someone self-harms, it'll automatically lead to thoughts of suicide or attempted suicide. That's not true. Self-harm is a risk factor for attempted suicide. It could possibly lead to that if treatment is not provided right away. And there are a few factors that I'm going to go into in a second that could possibly lead to from self-harm becoming attempted suicide. One of them is habituation to pain, and the other one is how much they think that they're a burden to other people. So repetitive self-harm. So if someone has been self-harming repeatedly for a long period of time, and after a while they stop experiencing that same sense of relief that they get from cutting or any form of self-injury, that is a risk factor for it becoming an attempt leading to attempted suicide. So it's really important, again, to intervene early so that you can prevent self-harm from becoming a pattern, and thus that leading to that habituation to pain. The other risk factor is feelings of being a burden on their loved ones. So for teenagers specifically, it's this feeling of being a burden on their parents. So my parents would be better off without me, or my friends would be better off without me, or whoever my caregiver is, I'm just a burden on them. And again, this is perceived burdensomeness, so it's not necessarily that they actually are a burden, but thinking that they're a burden on their loved ones. And then the last one is feelings of worthlessness. I'm useless, I'm not good enough. These are also possible risk factors. I'm just going to go really quickly. I'm going to go through some statistics that research studies have found, that self-harm in teens is more common in girls than in boys. That's what I've noticed. Also in my practice, I've treated a lot more girls coming in with self-harm behavior than boys. It's also research has found that it's more common amongst white teenagers and teens who identify as LGBTQ. Um, in the last several years, something that I've seen a lot of is teenagers who started self-harming, and who are also were in a group of peers in their schools who are also where their peers are also self-harming. So if a teenager is struggling anyway and they're in a friend group where they have other friends who are also self-harming, that's when they try it for the first time because they're influenced by what they're seeing around them. Um, it's often minimized as attention seeking or just a phase. I mentioned this earlier. So it's very, very important if your teenager is engaging in self-harm behavior to take it seriously and get them the help that they need. And I'm going to talk a little later on in this presentation, about it might seem like it's attention seeking only because they lack the skills to be able to communicate to a parent that, I'm struggling and I need the help. And so it's taken as attention seeking, but it could be considered like a call for help. There are a few different factors that I'm going to go into detail with on what contribute to self-harm behavior and what leads to it. So there's environmental factors at home, at school. There's cognitive factors, so things that are going through their minds, affective, which is related to their mood, and then behavioral factors. So with environmental factors, teenagers who live in a home environment where family members are also engaging in self-harm behaviors, or there's been an attempted suicide at home, or in some way, if a teenager is witnessing this, family members are modeling this kind of behavior in front of their teens. So teens begin to learn that life is painful and distress can only be relieved this way. So it becomes an option for them when life becomes challenging. The other thing is an invalidating home environment. So it doesn't mean that just because your teenager is engaging in self-harm behavior that the home environment is invalidating. This is just one possible factor that could contribute to it. So an invalidating home environment is just that if they're not getting the support they need, they think that this is a way for them to then get that support. So for instance, when a teenager indicates in some subtle way that they're in distress or they're having a really hard time, and the parents ignore this communication, the teen has a big emotional reaction, like a tantrum or an outburst. And if that gets attention, they learn that I have to be in a lot of pain and a lot of distress for me to get the reaction that I need. And this leads to that cycle of that behavior getting reinforced and getting that reaction, and therefore it leads to this emotion dysregulation that your teen might develop. The other factors are if a teen experiences sexual abuse or physical abuse, neglect. These are also very strong risk factors that lead to self-harm behavior. I've seen a lot of cases where teenage girls who've experienced sexual abuse in their childhood, and it was they haven't had an opportunity to get the right treatment when they were younger, are still dealing with that trauma, and don't have the right coping skills and engage in self-harm behavior as a way to deal with the trauma that they're experiencing. Loss of a caregiver can also be a really traumatic experience for a teen, and this is also something that's a risk factor. The next thing I'm going to talk about is cognitive factors. So all of us experience what we call automatic thoughts. So when we're in a situation, we have a lot of thoughts that pop up in our mind that we have no control over. So we call them automatic thoughts. Oftentimes, these thoughts are either realistic and accurate to the situation that we're in, or they might be inaccurate or not very realistic, our thoughts. And as a result of that, if we have an inaccurate or unrealistic thought in a situation, it often leads to these big emotions. And something that you'll notice when kids or when teenagers have these engage in self-harm behaviors, the the thoughts that precede the self-harm behaviors are often not very accurate or realistic about the situation that they're in. So there's a lot of like black and white thinking that then leads to this incident of self-harm. So part of treatment is a major chunk of treatment is spent on helping them identify what thoughts they're experiencing just in their day-to-day situations or in times when they have an urge to cut, and helping them modify those thoughts and think about the situation in a more realistic way. So an example over here is say your teen gets into a disagreement with someone, or a friend forgets to return a phone call. Most people might think, oh, I guess they probably didn't see that I called, or maybe their battery died, or they got really busy. Someone who might engage in more black and white thinking might think, okay, my friend doesn't want to be friends with me anymore. Maybe they don't like me anymore. Maybe they're upset with me for some reason. I must have said something. So sort of thinking of it in extreme, having that extreme thought process and then spiraling can then lead to an incident of self-harm. So some common um, thought patterns that we see are, I must get an A on every test or I'm a failure. I must get along with all of my friends or I'll be alone. So like I mentioned, part of the treatment is helping them identify and modify these thoughts to have a more realistic perspective on what's actually happening. Part of these cognitive factors is something that's called core beliefs. So beginning in childhood, people develop these ideas about themselves, the world, and the people around them. And these are rigid, pretty fixed beliefs about all of these things. So if someone's had a relatively good childhood, secure parents, and had a supportive, loving family, they might have a core belief like I'm good enough to be loved by others. Sometimes we have core beliefs that are negative, that are activated by stressors. And so we all have like mostly positive core beliefs, but then we have some negative core beliefs. So someone who has a core belief that I'm unlovable or I'm not good enough, in that same situation that I brought up earlier about a friend not returning a phone call, that core belief gets activated that I'm unlovable, and that's why my friend didn't return my call. Of course they wouldn't, of course they don't like me anymore. So that sort of gets triggered in that moment. So think of it as your thoughts are what's more on the surface, and then your core beliefs are what's underneath and what really affects the thoughts that you experience. So part of treatment, which is more toward the end of treatment, or as you've gotten through treatment a lot more, is working on those core beliefs. Just because they are such a fixed and rigid belief that you have about the world, it does take a lot of time to like break through and help teens understand that help them figure out whether those beliefs are actually accurate or maybe not as much as they think. So frequently with people who engage in self-harm, there are two categories of core beliefs. There's the core beliefs of incompetence and core beliefs of unlovability. So the unlovability is I'm unlovable, I'm unwanted, I'm a burden on others. And the incompetence ones are I'm not good enough or I'm a failure. The the next part is emotions that are commonly associated with self-harm behavior. It's really important to understand, even as a therapist, what are the commonly what are the emotions that often lead to self-harm for the teenager. So it could be anger, shame, anxiety, sadness, frustration. These are some of the common emotions that often then lead to the teen engaging in self-harm. But it's helpful, especially in the beginning of treatment, also to understand what the triggers are, what emotions often then lead to the teen engaging in self-harm. There are a few different ways in which this is done in treatment. It's done through diary cards that I'm going to show you in a second. There are also different apps that I recommend, especially since it's teenagers prefer to track things on their phone as opposed to actually having a physical copy of something. So Calm Urge is a really good app that can help them track their emotions as well as any urges or urges to cut or any times that they did self-injure. So this is what a diary card looks like. So I know it looks a little complicated, but I'm just going to focus on the left-hand corner of this diary card. So it goes into the days of the week. Use is related to substance use. Suicide is thoughts of suicide on a scale of 0 to 5. Self-harm, pain, sadness, shame, anger, and fear. So we provide this in treatment. Clients complete these diary cards where at the end of every day, we encourage them to think about their day and rate how they felt during the day on a scale of 0 to 5. So in this way, it's helping them be more in touch with their feelings and identify what they felt during the day, as well as recognize any triggers that may have led to self-harm, and any patterns that come up. So, and then they share it with the therapist in the following session. So, for instance, if self-harm was higher on Tuesday and you notice that feelings of shame were also higher, this is something that a teenager can recognize that, oh, there must be some connection then between these two. And then it gives you a way to think about why you self-harm and what are some of the triggers, because that's an important part to understand. And then the flip side of a diary card actually consists of skills that clients can use during the week. So they would circle the ones that they actually used when they had those urges. So the next part of this presentation is related to parenting styles. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what is the best kind of support that you can provide your teenager. So no matter what stressors lead to self-harm, positive parenting can always help. And parenting styles that are at extremes not only add extra stress for the parents, but also add stress for the teenager. So it's important to find that right balance between support and control. On one hand, you've got permissive parenting, which is highly supportive. So you provide a lot of support to your teenager, but there are very few rules and there's not as much monitoring of your child. The other end of the spectrum is authoritarian parenting, where there are too many rules that are set and the parents closely monitor their teenager and offer little support. So this is that helicopter parenting where it's like, you do as I say, and they're constantly monitoring their child, and there's not a lot of independence that's provided. So where we want to ideally go is the authoritative parenting, where the parent is highly supportive, but at the same time, there is a lot of structure at home and there are some rules at home. There are consequences for behavior. And it sort of goes like, I care, I'll give you the freedoms you earn, but for safety related issues, you'll do as I say. So, and I'm gonna go into details actually. This just gives a little more information on that. So It's giving your teen guidance and setting rules so that they can learn how to be responsible, because teenagers need some support and some structure and support in their lives as well. They need consequences for their behaviors. But at the same time, you're giving them more freedom as they show more responsibility, which is really important to give them that independence as well. Um, and most importantly, it's really beneficial for your teenager as well as for you, for your relationship, to spend time with them talking or doing fun activities to build a healthy relationship. So I know this can be challenging with a teenager because spending time with their parents is not always the first thing that they want to do. So it's helpful to figure out what are some things that they really enjoy doing and be a part of that. So it could be watching their favorite TV show with them and then talking to them about it afterwards, or asking them what they enjoy watching on TikTok and watching that with them, and then talking to them about this. Or if your teenager enjoys going to get bubble tea, making time to do that once in a while, or like once a week, to go with them and then talk to them about things. And if they're reluctant to talk to you about their life or school or other things that are going on in their life, it might be starting off just talking about things that they really like and then going from there, because it's so important to build that foundation with your teenager um before you can build that trust, so that if they are engaging in self-harm or if they're going through a really hard time, they're able to feel like they can trust you and come up to you and talk to you about these things and actually get help from you and get the support that they need. All right, so I'm gonna talk a little bit now about just things that you can do when your child is having a really hard time, or if they are engaging in self-harm and you find out about it at the time or later. It's important to let your teen know that you care. Just saying something like "I love you" and "I'm worried about you" can be a great way to start. The other important thing is to validate. Use less problem solving initially and just validate and accept their feelings. Just saying something like, "I can see that you're upset. I can see that you're really stressed out right now," can go a really long way, instead of asking them a million questions. Even though, understandably, you're worried about them and you're concerned, and it can be really distressing to see your child engaging in this behavior. It's still so important to just take a step back and validate them in that moment and try to think of this from their perspective. So just recognizing the emotion that they're feeling, "I can see that you're stressed, you're upset." And it's okay if you get the emotion wrong, they'll correct you, but it can be a good way to start this conversation. Um, it's also important to be non-judgmental. Let your teen know that if they want to talk about whatever they're going through, whatever stressful situation, or about their self-harm, that you're ready to listen without judging. You can use the script over here. You could say, "I'm worried about you. If there's something that you want to talk about, let me know. I promise I listen. I won't get angry or upset with you no matter what." It's very important not to punish them for engaging in self-harm, because it shouldn't be viewed as a form of non-compliance. And of course, if you notice that they have engaged, if they have self-harmed, you wanna, if you think that they require stitches or need to be taken to the emergency room, do that immediately. Again, ask them how you can help, how you can support them. Always take their self-harm injuries seriously. Um, the next thing is to avoid making them feel guilty. Even like if you are disgusted or if you're having a really strong emotion to what you're seeing, it's really important to not make them feel guilty, because most of the time, even though self-harm is a way for them to get temporary relief from what they're feeling, most people feel a sense of shame afterwards. So with you making them feel more guilty or ashamed of what they've done is just gonna ruin the trust that you have, and it won't be great for your relationship as well. Um, Instead, what you could do after you've validated them and spoken to them a little bit, something you could do is to suggest a distraction. So distractions are not a long-term solution at all, but this can be a good alternative to engaging in self-harm or making the situation worse for your teenagers. So if they're not willing to talk about the situation, you could say, how about we take a walk for a little while? Or how about we watch this funny video on YouTube? Because what that's going to help with the distraction is the intensity of the emotion is going to go down to a point where they're then able to problem solve or discuss with you, or by themselves figure out whatever the underlying trigger was and actually work through that, because that's what you ultimately want to do. So I'm going to go over some replacement skills. These are things that are taught in therapy. It can be helpful, even even as a parent, to be able to recommend to your teenager or your child, if there's certain ones that are helpful instead of engaging in self-harm behavior, if there's a different replacement skill that they can use. So with these skills that I'm going to talk about, first, it's important to practice it when as a teen, to practice it when they're calm, and then once they get used to using this strategy, they'll be more successful in using it in highly emotional situations. This is something that's done. It's helpful earlier on in treatment before more intensive work is done, just because before you go into the more intensive work, you want to be able to provide the teen with some other skills that they can use instead of self-harm. So one of them is marking your body with a red colored marker. So this could be uh, in the area where your teen generally cuts. So it could be on the arm, on the thigh, wherever, marking it with a red marker instead. Um, Applying a temporary tattoo to a portion of the body and then scratching it off with a fingernail. This was something that a few of my clients have found to be a helpful strategy. And you can get these temporary tattoos on Amazon and apply it and then scratch it during the times when, instead of self-harming, scratching it off with your fingernail in situations that are highly stressful. Snapping a rubber band on the area of an arm or leg that's usually cut. This is also a popular strategy that's used a lot. Drawing a picture depicting the self-injury in a body area. So this is helpful for teens who are especially creative. I've had clients who are very artistic, and who've talked about uh, um, finding the way in which they see blood to be appeasing for them. So what they do is they would find a color of, like, with paint, find a color that looks a lot like what the blood would look like, and they would depict that on the area that they generally self-harm. And I've had clients who do that, and it's been really successful in getting them to not cut themselves, as in the initial stages of treatment. Other apps that are helpful is Calm Harm is a really good app for these replacement skills. It has a long list of replacement skills. So especially if they're clients who or teenagers who don't like any of the strategies that you're suggesting or recommending, and they want to think of something different, and they're having a hard time thinking of their own strategies that could help, this is a really helpful app for them to just go through the list of recommended strategies and see which works best for them. Mindfulness is such an important part of the treatment for self-harm behavior. Mindfulness is all about being fully focused in the present moment and doing only one thing at a time. mindfulness is such a good match for teenagers who engage in self-harm behavior because oftentimes teens experience the opposite of mindfulness. Their mind, they're if they're distressed or if they're distracted, they're the opposite of focused. And so mindfulness skills teaches them how to stay in the moment. And mindfulness doesn't necessarily mean only breathing strategies. It could just be cleaning your room mindfully, or doing chores mindfully, or taking a shower mindfully. But teens learn over the course of treatment that to be mindful in order to calm themselves and then be able to solve problems more effectively. So I'm going to go over a few other replacement skills that are helpful. Listening to music or playing an instrument is by far the most popular replacement skill with teenagers. And when you suggest listening to music, it's listening to music in a really mindful way. So being really focused on the melody, or being really focused on a specific instrument or the beat of the music. Or using art. If there's someone if your teen is, again, very creative or artistic, this can be a great way to stay grounded in the moment by coloring or painting, or using any other form of art. Writing is another helpful strategy. This I've seen go both ways. Sometimes some people find this to be really helpful, where some teenagers find this even more like it can make them feel a little more stressed out. So it's just important to understand what helps you and what doesn't. The last one is sorry, the last one. The next one is communicating with others, which could be reaching out to friends, reaching out to family members, or any other close person that you can get some support from, or even just distract you from what you're experiencing in that moment. This can also be hotlines that people have used in the past and find helpful. Um, Other distraction techniques, again, I'm repeating that these are used in the initial stages of treatment. This could be something like um, using, like, watching a funny video, or using their phone, playing with their dog, petting their cat, reading a book, uh, cleaning up their room, going for a walk, playing a sport. These are all distraction techniques that can just bring down the intensity of the emotion until that person or the teen is ready to then think about the problem that had triggered that incident to begin with. Then I'm going to talk about treatment options. The best treatment for anybody, whether it's a teenager or adult, who engages in self-harm behavior is dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. So DBT treatment in individual therapy, while you'll be looking at what are the deeper issues that are leading to the self-harm behavior, and it would be working with the teenager on their thoughts, their feelings, and also teaching them a lot of skills to get through difficult moments. So it would be helping them with regulating their emotions, helping them with tolerating intense distress. Um, there's a lot of mindfulness that's incorporated into DBT. And the last part is teaching them how to be more assertive, how to ask for things that are difficult, instead of it leading to demanding things that teenagers do a lot, is instead of like asking in a way that maintains the relationship. So these are all really helpful tools that are provided in DBT. And also we have group therapy, which is great in conjunction with individual DBT. Group therapy, the only difference between group therapy and the individual therapy in DBT is that group therapy focuses a lot more on just the skills rather than working individually with the client and understanding, maybe what's going on in their environment that's contributing to self-harm. So it's more a skill-based group therapy. At Manhattan Psychology Group, we offer DBT group therapy as well. So if anyone's interested, they can shoot us a message in the chat. And the last part is family therapy. Family therapy is as needed for individuals or teenagers who might have a difficult home environment, or there might be something going on at home that's contributing to the stress that they're experiencing and might be leading to self-harm. In those kinds of situations, family therapy is highly recommended. So that's all I have for today. I hope this was helpful, and thank you everyone for joining us. If there's any questions, please put them in the Q&A, and I see some things here.
Yeah, we have one from Terry. They said, could the drive for self-harm purely come from feeling unloved by peers? I have seen kids come from loving, supportive families fall into self-harm purely from peer rejection or romantic breakup.
That's a great question. So there's definitely, a lot of factors that contribute to self-harm. So if you have like a loving home environment, but your teen has been through some really hard times with friends and has been through some really challenging romantic relationships, and is anyway, like sensitive, and has other things going on that are then leading to them feeling that way, it can definitely contribute to that. I'd be curious to see like what else is going on that's leading to that. But again, going back to what I'd mentioned earlier is like, what is the thought process for your child when they're in that situation? So it would be helpful to understand a little bit more about what's going on, but that can definitely be a factor. Great question.
Awesome. And then I have one more here. They said, I'm a therapist who works with adolescents who self-harm. In a few cases, the teens keep the parents out. The parents are at a loss because they don't have the opportunity to see their child to even know that they are upset. They're very understanding and only want support. Can you speak a little about how parents can still show support without talking to their child?
Where is the question in the chat?
I had to remove it per
Oh, okay.
it had
Okay.
just popped away. So I have it in my
Okay.
notes.
Okay, so what you're asking for is, what you're saying is, if the teen is not sharing things with you, is that what the question is? Is not
Yeah, let
sharing things
me,
with the parent?
I just sent it to you in the
Okay.
chat as well.
Okay.
And yes, yep, that's what they were saying.
All right, I'm just reading this. So something that I recommend. So I see your question. So you're saying, about how parents can support their child without having to talk to their child specifically about what's going on. So something that I would start with is just even having the parents ask the child, say, helping them understand firstly, like when their child is upset, and then speaking to them and saying, listen, I can see that you're upset right now. Are you ready to talk about this? And if they say, no, I don't want to talk to you about it, just say, I want you to know that I'm here. And whenever you're ready to talk about this, you can come to me. Just showing that support and letting your child know that you're available can go a long way, because a lot of times kids shut down when the parents come to them, and are really scared and worried about what they're seeing, and then ask you lots and lots and lots, ask the child lots and lots of questions, or make some judgmental comments. And so the child learns like there's no point. I'm not getting the support that I need from my parents. So maybe changing that dynamic a little bit can be helpful in building that trust again. And like I'd mentioned earlier, to help build that relationship. And it might take some time, like spending some time with your child, doing fun things or doing things that they find really enjoyable can really reset your relationship and try to build on that warm bond that you anyway have with them, but to sort of like build it to a point where they can trust you and feel more confident or comfortable talking to you. Hope that helps.
And then any suggestions on how to work on the parent-child relationship validation piece when the teen has no interest in strengthening that relationship? She's preferring to stay in her room 24/7.
Um, yeah, that's a good question as well. And that's another thing that you find very frequently with teenagers. It's really hard to get them to do things that would be fun. I would say keep trying at that piece because and it could just mean like really talking to them and saying like, you know, hey, I would love to just spend more time with you, and I know that you're so busy doing blah blah blah. But I wonder what would be something that would be enjoyable for you. So that way you're helping them identify things that could be fun, and if you know things that they do enjoy. So if they're on their phone watching TikTok the whole day, it could be like, hey, I'm really curious about what you watch on TikTok. I'd love it if you could, you know, share with me something that you watch. It's really helpful, you know, with the teen to have a lot of like respectful curiosity. So you're asking them, you know, about things, but you're genuinely showing interest, even if you think it's whatever they watch is, you know, completely ridiculous. It really helps to just like try to understand what it is that's so interesting to them and see if that might help to start working on talking to them a little bit more. And like I said, you know, not maybe when you do get an opportunity to talk to them, you know, asking them about things that you know they might be more willing to talk about, as opposed to, you know, how is school or how's homework going or things like that that you know they might shut down.
So thank you. I see a question here about providers. Before I get there, if anybody has any questions that maybe they don't feel comfortable asking in the Q&A or on the chat, you can share them to professionaldevelopment@manhattanpsychologygroup.com, and I will discuss with Mohini and we will get you some answers to them as well. There will also be some snippets and any other questions that were unanswered on our social medias. Awesome. So my next question that I see here is from Megan. Do you know any providers in Northern Florida that are from your company organization? I'm always on the hunt for new providers. Megan, I do know that we have some providers who are able to provide telehealth services in Florida. As for direct in-person, I'm not sure if we have any providers down there currently. But you can certainly email us at the professional development email. We can get you some more information there as well. Any last minute questions? Well, thank you, Mohini, for coming and talking to everybody. I know it was a very beneficial webinar today, and we appreciate your expertise in this subject. Everybody else,
Thank you
thank
so
you
much
for
for
joining us.
joining.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you all have happy holidays if you celebrate.